one final thing. How many more Americans left in Afghanistan? This was raised in Pentagon, and they referred them to the States.
Well, we have been consistent in explaining that in every country, Americans register with the embassy. So it's a voluntary thing.
Surely, but you understand this is a question that also defines the length of this mission.
It does. And the president has been very clear that we are going to do as much as we can for as long as we can, and our first priority is the safe repatriation of the American people. So what we did overnight was to send a message to all American citizens who had expressed an interest in repatriation. We have already repatriated many Americans. Just today there are 6,000 more people, many of whom are American U.S. citizens at the airport compound, and I would expect in the coming days.
Are those 6,000 people, you said they've been processed, are they clear to continue on once they land in Qatar, or did they have to be held in that facility?
So these are different categories of individuals. Some
There's an assumption in the question that you answered it positively. I just want to make sure that it's correct. Do you believe that the Taliban has taken power by force at the barrel of a gun?
There has not been a formal transfer of power. Of course, it's a fluid dynamic. There are ongoing discussions between Afghan leaders following.
But the question was, you said you would never recognize or deal with a government that had seized power at the barrel of a gun. You're not prepared to make that statement yet that the Taliban has seized power at the barrel of a gun, right?
We are taking stock of what has transpired. There continues to be dialogue between Afghans, between representatives of the Taliban and representatives of the Islamic Republic.
You say that also that the center of gravity has shifted from Doha to Afghanistan.
Right.
Isn't it clear from what's happened over the past couple of months that the center of gravity was always in Afghanistan and never in Doha, and it was basically a waste of time?
I'm not.
Doha.
Look, we are not prepared to say that. We're not prepared to say that
because what happened in Doha has accomplished a great deal.
Matt, when you
sarcastic, I just want to know. I mean, do you think that anything that has been achieved in Doha since February 2020 is actually accomplished?
the intra-Afghan dialogue, the discussions between the Afghans, in this case, the Taliban and the representatives of the Islamic Republic, those are ongoing. It matters very little whether that happens in Doha, whether that happens in Kandahar, whether that happens in Kabul. All along, our goal has not been to be prescriptive. Our goal has not been to forge a consensus, to create a consensus. Our goal has been to support that intra-Afghan dialogue, and it's an intra-Afghan dialogue that remains ongoing.
Can I ask? Did you get an answer to my question about Bahrain from the week? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just want to know if you want to say anything about Ken Merton on camera, but there's more important stuff.
Well, as you know,
you really don't care about Haiti anymore. So.
That's Matt. I am answering the questions that are asked of me, so I care about your priorities. So if it has fallen off your priority list,
I think I brought it up at the very top. Did I not? I got the country wrong.
I'm not sure you ended your sentence with a question mark, because oftentimes you don't.
Did you want to say
I am happy to reiterate what the Secretary said. We are grateful that Ken Merton, an experienced department hand, will be going to serve in Port-au-Prince as our chargé d'affaires. As you know, Ambassador Sisson has been nominated for an important post here. She has returned to the United States, and we're grateful that Ken Merton has accepted the ask that he go serve in this.
So does that mean that
role.
she's left?
That's right.
So she's back here.
That's correct. Perhaps in the Indo-Pacific context, it's
that Mr. Baker made a mistake in making that promise, or the U.S. government doesn't consider that a promise broken, or at least that understands why the Russians would be responding
This
this
has
way?
been long-standing policy of the United States, going back administrations. It's been long-standing policy of NATO for years now, going back and most acutely reflected in Bucharest. So this is not a new pronouncement we have put out. I want to also be clear about one other thing. NATO is a defensive alliance. It is defensive in nature. It's defensive in orientation. The idea that NATO or an aspirant country like Ukraine could pose a threat to Russia. I think as Secretary Blinken said last week, it would be laughable were the situation not so serious. So again, we have heard some of the same chatter from Moscow, chatter that to us sounds awfully pretextual, sounds an awful lot like what we might have and what we did in fact hear in 2014 in advance of Russians' previous military incursion into Ukraine. We know this is part of the Russian playbook, and we know it because we've seen it before. We know it because we've heard it before. We also know it because we're detecting it. As the Secretary said last week, we have seen social media postings with disinformation and misinformation increase by more than tenfold in recent weeks. And again, our concern, and this is reflected, and I think your question and some of what we're hearing emanate from Russia, is that there will be an attempt to fabricate some sort of pretextual justification for Russia and Russian forces to do what perhaps has been intended all along. So right now, we believe that there's a window of opportunity for us to engage diplomatically, as we've done with our NATO allies, to engage diplomatically with our Ukrainian partners, but also to engage diplomatically with the Russians. And we've done this already at senior levels. Of course, we've already engaged President Putin on this. President Biden will speak to him tomorrow. Secretary Blinken last week spoke to Foreign Minister Lavrov as well.
But, I think that what Barbara's making the point about James Baker's comment about not one word is not necessarily Ukraine in the future, but the fact that NATO has already expanded eastward after that promise was made. Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Baltic States. And you might say that NATO is a defensive alliance, but the Russians, you can believe them whether you want to or not, but they don't see it that way. And they look at what NATO operations in Serbia, NATO operations in Libya, as not being defensive in nature. So just to make that point, that it is not necessarily Ukraine that's here; it is the past. And then just the one thing that I hope you can answer is the Secretary speaking with President Zelensky today?
So on that, the Secretary, as I was walking out here, was on the phone with President Zelensky. He, as President Biden announced, is speaking to President Zelensky in the run-up to the conversation between the two presidents tomorrow.
I'm sorry, the President is speaking to President Zelensky?
Secretary Blinken is speaking to President Zelensky. Sorry if I misspoke.
No. I just wanted to make
sure. The president said this morning that Secretary Blinken would be speaking to President Zelensky. But let me make one other point about your point in your question, Barbara and Matt. We are supportive of increased transparency, of dialogue between Russia and NATO. If there is misunderstanding about what NATO is, what NATO seeks to do, what NATO is doing, we certainly support engagement, we support dialogue, we support transparency, because we don't want there to be any ambiguity about what this alliance stands for and what this alliance is resolutely opposed to. So if that would be a means by which to increase some level of trust and confidence between Moscow and NATO, we would be in support of that. Tomorrow, that's precisely why President Biden will be engaging President Putin, because we believe there's no substitute for leader-level engagement, high-level engagement, the kind of engagement that you've seen between the Secretary and Foreign Minister Lavrov, that you saw between President Putin and President Biden in June in Switzerland, and what you'll see tomorrow as well.
Thank you.
In all fairness, NATO has not always been defensive, as Matt pointed out, in Serbia and Libya and other places. Anyway.
In all fairness, NATO has never been offensive towards Russia.
What do you call their interference in Libya? what do you call what they did in
I
Libya?
think Libya and Russia are, and we can
No,
we
I'm
can
just
we can have a
saying
separate
that-
conversation
no,
about
that's a different conversation.
the
I
NATO
agree.
mission in Libya. But to call to say that Russia and Libya are synonymous, I'm not sure that is something that. In fact, I'm quite confident that's something that this department would
Okay,
not
all
subscribe
right,
to.
let me move.
Why aren't you confirming for the sake of transparency where there are cases reported? If there are Havana syndrome or not, it's another thing, but where there are reported incidents, why aren't you doing that? And then I have another question on Cuba protests.
So in many cases, it is a matter of privacy of individuals wanting to respect privacy. But let me just make clear that when cases have been reported, our posts overseas have communicated that clearly to the community within the embassy. We have also engaged, Brian McCune has engaged with posts that have reported a number of anomalous health incidents. So it is certainly not the case that we are ignoring this. We are just not speaking to the press. We're speaking to our workforce, as you might expect when it comes to a matter of their health and safety and security. You said you had another question?
I wanted to ask you about Cuba's government decision to ban a protest that was planned for November 15, claiming that the organizers are backed by the U.S. To overthrow the regime. Do you have any comment on that? Any response?
Well, let me make one thing very clear at the outset. What happened in July, what transpired in the days and the weeks after that, it was not about the United States. It was about the conduct of the Cuban regime, the unmet aspirations of the Cuban people for freedom, for dignity, for prosperity, the elements that they have been denied by this regime for far too long, since 1959. The world watched, the United States watched as Cuban authorities arrest and beat peaceful protesters, journalists, independent voices in mid-July, starting on July 11th. There have been many arbitrarily detained, many are missing. We know that the government has conducted secret summary trials of those arrested. And we join their families, we join Cuba's human rights defenders, people around the world, in calling for the immediate release of all those detained, all those who are detained or missing, merely for exercising their fundamental human rights. It's the freedom of expression. It is the freedom to assemble peacefully that the Cuban government has denied to its people. The violence that we've seen, the detention that we've seen, the crackdowns that we've seen, now the prohibitions on peaceful protest that we've seen, all of this remind us that it is the Cuban people who are paying dearly in their fight for freedom, their fight for dignity. We call for their release. We call for the government in Havana to respect the fundamental freedoms and the fundamental rights of the Cuban people. Yes, Michelle?
Yeah, I have a question. First, do you have any comment on the Iraqi parliamentary elections? And how do you view the bloc that Muqtada Sadr won and the defeat of popular mobilization forces?
So when it comes to the Iraqi elections, we congratulate the Iraqi government on having fulfilled its promise to hold early elections. We are pleased that the election days were largely conducted peacefully. We have seen the preliminary results announced by the Iraqi Independent High Electoral Commission, and we're awaiting for the final certified results. So we will omit judgment until then. But these elections included hundreds of international monitors and observers from the UN and the EU, in addition to thousands of domestic observers. We look forward to reviewing their reports. Once the final results are certified, we hope that the new Council of Representatives members will form a government that reflects the will of the Iraqi people and which can work to address Iraq's governance, security, and economic challenges. When it comes to Muqtada al-Sadr, again, we're waiting for final results. We don't want to prejudge the outcome, but we do look forward to working with the new government once it is formed.
And
sure.
So the Russians say that they have made a proposal to you and said, you know, if you lift your sanctions, we'll lift ours. I haven't seen any response from you guys yet. Do you have one?
Well, we will leave the diplomacy to people like Undersecretary Nuland and to others who will carry this forward. What I can say about her engagement today, her meetings have been, there's been open discussion, her meetings have been useful, and and our stance on the staffing of our mission remains firm. We expect parity on staffing numbers, and we expect visa reciprocity. There must be fairness, there must be flexibility on the Russian side if we are to achieve an equitable agreement, and that's precisely what we are after. We did agree to another round of discussions, and we hope that continued talks may bring to bear a resolution so that our mission in Moscow can resume its normal activity. I do expect that follow-on discussions will be at a lower level, probably at the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State level, but we do hope that those discussions can bear fruit because we do want open channels of communication with Moscow. We do think that a fully staffed or adequately staffed embassy in Moscow is important to our goal of having a free flow of information to manage responsibly the bilateral relationship with Moscow.
Does that mean that you've given up on trying to get St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and Vladivostok reopened?
Again,
You can't. In 3 times in what you just said, in what was written down in front of you, you talked about the embassy in Moscow, but you didn't talk about the consulates.
The staffing. I should have been clear. The staffing of our missions, plural. So I will leave the.
Well, then, so are you willing to consider an agreement, a deal, for lack of a better word, with the Russians so that they can reopen their closed consulates here, and you can reopen yours or staff?
We want to see.
Are you just looking? Are you only looking to get Moscow back to full staffing strength, or are you looking for something more?
What we know is that we need an adequately staffed embassy in Moscow if we are going to be able to conduct the sort of diplomacy to have the open channels of communications with the Russian government that we need. But I don't want to get bogged down in the details. The broad point is that we want and we need an ability to engage diplomatically at multiple levels with the government of Moscow. So again, I'm going to leave the diplomacy. I'm going to leave the.
Already able to have open diplomatic channels. I mean, you just had Wendy Sherman and Bonnie Jenkins in Geneva meeting with the Russians. You just had Tori, she's still there.
Matt,
it's not like
Matt, one-off engagements, one-off ad hoc engagements are no substitute for open channels of communication. So again, I'm going to leave the diplomacy to Undersecretary Nuland and to those who are carrying this forward, but it is important to us that we have an ability to engage bilaterally and an open and effective way with the Russian government.
On the consulates. Is that correct? All right. So in terms of your grand promotion of democracy, human rights, which are going to be at the center of U.S. foreign policy, as we'll see, no doubt, in December when the president hosts his summit for democracy. How does that relate exactly to Afghanistan and your promotion of human rights and democracy when you have a situation where the country is rapidly coming under control of a group that has shown no respect for democracy and human rights ever?
I'm sorry, the question was?
How do you reconcile this? How does the administration expect to be taken seriously in terms of promoting human rights and democracy as being at the center of U.S. foreign policy if it is prepared to allow Afghanistan to deteriorate into a situation where a group that has shown that you yourself just days ago have accused of committing atrocities, if you're prepared to allow that to happen?
I would reject every single premise of that question.
Really?
The United States.
Most of what I just said is actual. Is
The
just factual.
the United States, I think it is undeniable, has over the course of 20 years done more to support the cause of the Afghan people, to provide humanitarian support, just numerically speaking. Of course, we are the largest donor, and that includes humanitarian assistance. It includes assistance for the women and girls of Afghanistan, for Afghanistan's minorities. That won't change. I would also reject the premise that we are just prepared to watch and do nothing as the violence escalates. That could not be farther from the truth. The truth, Matt, is that on every count, on every score, the United States, over the course of the past 20 years, and now, going forward, is, I would dare say, doing more than any country to try to bring stability, security, and ultimately prosperity to the people of Afghanistan. Now, it is true that our tactics are changing, that the president has made the decision to withdraw our military forces. That says nothing about our support for the rights of the people of Afghanistan and what we will continue, what we have done and will continue to strive to do to bring stability and security to the people of Afghanistan right now as we speak through a diplomatic process. And I know you tend to discount diplomacy, at least in this case.
I just don't think, I don't see how you can realistically think that it's going to accomplish anything, because it hasn't in the past. And if you say you reject the premise that you're prepared to sit by and watch and do nothing, well, what have you done over the course of the last couple of weeks as these atrocities that you've talked about have mounted, as the Taliban has taken over more and more territory? What exactly has it been that you have done? You said that you weren't going to sit back and do nothing. What have you done?
Happy to reiterate much of what we've done. Of course, we've spoken of our humanitarian assistance, which is directly relevant to the current and future conditions of the Afghan people, including its women and girls, and Afghanistan's minorities as well. Just right now, just this week. And again, this is diplomacy, what we think has the potential to lead to a political settlement and a ceasefire. It is ongoing actively right now. There are several rounds of planned meetings this week. First took place yesterday. There was another one today. There will be another one tomorrow, bringing together representatives from countries in the region and well beyond, as well as from multilateral institutions. In Doha, to press for a reduction of violence and a ceasefire and a commitment on the part of all those in attendance. This constellation of representatives from various countries and international organizations, not to work with any entity that takes the country by force. And so just today, Ambassador Khalilzad and his team participated in a meeting of the extended troika, that is to say the United States, Russia, China, and Pakistan. There, the countries aligned efforts to press the Taliban to reduce violence, to engage seriously and urgently in Afghan peace negotiations, including the fundamental issues needed to resolve that conflict. I said this started yesterday. Yesterday, Ambassador Khalilzad and his team participated in a meeting with on the current situation, including the current levels of violence, with the UN envoy, Jean Arnaud, and representatives from the region and other international stakeholders. Tomorrow, there will be a broader set of countries, we expect, that will come together. And in all of this, it's our intention to forge consensus and to have the international community, including countries in the region and beyond, to speak with one voice. Both sets of these meetings this week included briefings from both the Islamic Republic, that's the Afghan government, and from the Taliban negotiating teams. Abdullah, the chairman, is there representing the Afghan government. Mullah Baradar is there representing the Taliban. This is high-level representation.
The other countries, are you prepared to say, or do you know yet? Who
We'll
else?
have more detail on that tomorrow.
But the Taliban will be represented in those meetings as well?
Yes, there will be a correct.
Is it correct that the Secretary has not spoken to Mullah Baradar or any Taliban member?
That is correct.
So he has his representations about this have been confined to the Afghan government. When, in terms of the Afghan people, it
has included the Afghan government. Of course, when we visited Kabul, we met with President Ghani, we met with Abdullah. It's multiple conversations with President Ghani.
The last Secretary of State, or the only Secretary of State to have spoken with the Taliban directly, was his predecessor.
In the context of the conclusion of the U.S.-Taliban agreement. But let me make one other point. Of course, the Secretary has also been actively engaged in speaking with countries, representatives countries from the region on this.
You're trying to impute some kind of. I just want to know if it's correct. I'm not saying that it's good or bad, whether he is or not. Do you happen to know?
One more point. Just on this to give you the full context.
I just have one more, and it's extremely brief because I think the answer is going to be no.
Okay. Well, Ambassador Khalilzad, in the context of all of this, will meet with each negotiating team separately, as we frequently do, to encourage them to engage productively in this process, and importantly, not to squander this opportunity, which may be an historic opportunity to end what is not.
Wait, squander this what opportunity? What are you talking about?
The opportunity.
The opportunity that brought about by you guys withdrawing?
The opportunity.
Which has plunged the country, 65% of the country into chaos?
The opportunity of the Afghan government and the Taliban and the rest of the world, at least a large swath of the world, coming together. And let me remind you, it's been less than a year since both the Afghan government and the Taliban have been willing to talk, have been engaged in intra-Afghan dialogue. So we have an opportunity, have had an opportunity in recent weeks and months that in many ways Afghanistan has not had over the course of 40 years. We talk about the past 3 weeks of violence, the past 3 months of violence. This has been 40 years of conflict. Mm-hmm. And so with the Taliban and the Afghan government now willing to talk to one another, of course that is a necessary but insufficient step. But what we are doing is galvanizing the international community, supporting these intra-Afghan discussions to attempt to make progress, to do a couple things, to stop this military offensive, diminish the level of violence, and more broadly to negotiate a political settlement, to form an inclusive Afghan government that ends this conflict. We remain confident in the fact that this is the only path to stability. We remain cognizant of the fact that this is the only path to stability and development in Afghanistan. So progress has been slow. It has been painfully slow. The violence has been a cause for grave concern. We've been very clear about that.
I think a lot of people would argue that there's not been any progress. It's not been slow. It's been non-existent. But anyway, did you get an answer to the question I had yesterday about whether the Taliban was violating the terms of the February 2020 Doha Agreement?
Sure. Let me add a bit of context there. There are several key parts of this February 2020 agreement to highlight. Number one, the Taliban will take specific actions to prevent any group or individual, including Al-Qaeda, from using Afghanistan to threaten the security of the United States and its allies. This, of course, incredibly important to us. We have a commitment from the Taliban. We also have capabilities in the region to see to it that this remains the case. Number two, the United States and coalition partners will withdraw foreign military forces from Afghanistan. This is especially noteworthy in the context of our decision-making process. And it's something that we obviously talked about at length yesterday. Number three, the Taliban and the Islamic Republic will launch intra-Afghan negotiations. It's a point I've just made that the two sides had not come together until this agreement went into force, and they've been meeting now for less than a year. But the very fact that Abdullah and Mullah Baradar are in Qatar is a sign of that. And number 4, a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire and agreement over the future political roadmap of Afghanistan will be part of the agenda of the intra-Afghan negotiations. And so this one, that's particularly relevant to your question on this. But the way we look at these 4 elements is that they are linked. They are interrelated. Intra-Afghan negotiations leading to a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire were an integral element of the agreement, and all recent indications, at least, suggest the Taliban are instead pursuing a battlefield victory.
Yeah, but they didn't agree in February 2020 not to seek a battlefield victory against the Afghan government.
What they
Did
agreed
they or
to
did
do?
they not?
What they agreed to do was to seek a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire agreement.
Yeah, through these peace talks, which
Correct.
have gone nowhere.
Correct. And
Did they agree
and-
in February 2020? Did they agree not to attack Afghan
What we
major
can say-
population centers or the Afghan government?
What
Afghan
we can
forces?
say-
Did they or
What
did
we
they
can
not?
say is that the levels of violence are unacceptably high, and what we have seen is inconsistent with the letter and the spirit of the
But they
agreement.
didn't actually agree not to attack cities, provincial capitals, major population centers, or the Afghan or the Afghan military. Did they?
Attacking provincial capitals and targeting civilians is inconsistent with the spirit of the agreement. It's this last clause of the agreement, the key point that I mentioned, a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire agreement over the future political roadmap of Afghanistan
put that
will
down
be
as
part
a
of
no.
the agenda of the.
So can you just list the countries that are right now receiving these U.S. evacuation flights? Just list, and then we'll move on.
So we will actually have a statement from the Secretary where he's going to be in a position to offer some additional detail on this. But as you know, many of these individuals have been going to Doha to date. The first flights have now landed in Ramstein Air Base. Bahrain has agreed to host and has been playing host to some of those we have transferred from Afghanistan. And you will see in a statement from the Secretary, I would expect later today, there is a broader universe of countries that have agreed to host either at-risk Afghans, American citizens, or third country nationals.
But we're now almost a week into this evacuation effort. As of today, there's only one country that is definitively accepting these U.S. evacuation flights. So what does that say about your guys' process behind this?
Well, that's not accurate. There is one country where at-risk Afghans have been going. We have been at this for some time now, since the security situation in Kabul began to deteriorate. Among those we've evacuated in the past week or so have included members of our embassy team, American direct hire employees.
But at-risk Afghans are the majority of the people that we're talking about here. So if you only had one country that up until this date has agreed to accept those Afghans, why was that the case? What happened?
Well, Kylie, as you know, we have, and DoD has spoken to their tremendous capacity here in the United States to host SIV applicants at military bases. And they've spoken to this in terms of tens of thousands. My colleague at the Pentagon was just speaking to this. So it is not the case that there is only one location for at-risk Afghans. As these operations have started,
One foreign country that's accepting at-risk Afghans at this moment. Is that correct?
There is, first of all, we have relocated to the United States 2,000 SIV applicants under Operation Allies Refuge. Doha has very generously agreed to host these at-risk Afghans as they undergo their processing and continue on to their final destinations. In many cases, that is going to be the United States if they are SIV applicants. So Qatar is not intended to be a long-term location for any Afghans, for any Americans, of course, for any third country nationals. And in fact, flights have already started to take off from Qatar to bring people on a commercial basis, on a charter basis, to the United States, in the case of American citizens, to Ramstein, as I mentioned, for others. And we're going to have additional capacity coming online very soon, in addition to the military bases here that, as you've heard from the Pentagon, can host thousands upon thousands of at-risk Afghans. Laura?